Anyway, Janelle John-Bates, what are your thoughts on this being raised once more in the public? Well, by the head of the Criminal Bar Association and by one business head as well, Mr. Booth.
A state of emergency, I am a bit ambivalent because I understand why people are calling for it. People are calling for it because crime has reached such a level that we are even willing to give up our freedoms. Because that's what a state of emergency really results in, When you look at it, it's a temporary suspension of a lot of the rights of all the citizens, not just those who are involved in crime. So the question is, are we in such a state that we are really willing to give up our freedom of movement, our ability to protest and march, our ability to have certain articles in our possession, our ability to privacy of our homes, because when we had the last state of emergency implemented in relation to crime, police were given the right to enter and search your home without a warrant for certain things. So are we as citizens willing to give up those rights to address crime? That's the first question, and a lot of people would say yes, but then to me, a state of emergency is really a Band-Aid. It's a short-term solution. Unless we implement a lot of other long-term solutions, we will be back to square one at the end of the state of emergency.
Now, I take your point there about a Band-Aid and a short-term solution versus a long-term solution is well received. I absolutely agree with you. But I would like to flip that a little bit because there seems to be no plan. And the Honourable Minister says, well, his job is policy direction. I don't know what direction we're heading in. I don't know if you could answer that for me. But essentially, the situation is all those things that you've just called to a certain degree that currently exist. I'm not, I'm afraid. Yes, I have freedom of movement, but I'm limited because I'm afraid. I don't even want to be out when the sun goes down. If I need to run out and get something, all of those are to consider. So even though right now we are still privy to such freedoms, it is still very much limited. So being in a lockdown due to a state of emergency may actually be welcomed and received. Not by criminals, of course, but probably by citizens, law-abiding citizens such as you and I.
You choosing to stay in your house after 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock is different from you cannot leave between these 2 hours unless of some extreme emergency. It's different from I am closing my burglar proof and going inside and sitting down, hopefully happily and watching TV, versus a police being able to kick down my door to search for firearms and whatever they feel they need to search for. It's different from someone stopping you on the street to search you for firearms. You, Ketan, walking on the road right now, you're not subject to that.
Mm-hmm. But so shouldn't I only be concerned or worried about that? I mean, yes, police will have powers, but if I'm not doing anything wrong, I shouldn't have much to fear coming out of that.
Well, I mean, because you are now giving up your rights. You're giving them that power. And beyond that, what's another thing I haven't seen in the discussion about implementing a state of emergency? The last time we had a state of emergency was in a pandemic. And one of the results of that is the economic ramifications of that. If we go into that 9 to 5 curfew that normally comes along in Trinidad with a state of emergency, all those businesses that operate at night, people who sell food, people who work in nightclubs and other establishments, even health workers, maintenance and those things, all of those things are already affected. We already went through 2 years where people have suffered economically. So again, I am not saying yes, I'm not saying no, I'm just bringing the point. Are we willing for that short-term Band-Aid to suffer economic ramifications? Will that then still spiral again into more crime because people have now again lost another it starts at 15 days, 3 months, 6 months of being unable to work?
So then there are 2 things to that. One, murders could still happen between the hours of 9 to 5. And the hours don't have to be 9 to 5. But then, whilst I am hearing the points that you're making, and they are fair points, I will also suggest that you have also made an argument against the last state of emergency over the pandemic. You are yourself citing that it didn't seem to be necessary because of the ramifications of such. Yes, there was a public health emergency, but look at what has transpired following that.
I did not say that.
You didn't say that.
I did not say the last.
I am saying I'm interpreting that.
But you see, the last state of emergency that I mentioned was in relation to natural disaster. And this is a point that most people don't argue because It sounds bad to really oppose a state of emergency given our crime. But when you look at the Constitution and the section that allows the president to make this declaration and proclamation of a public state of emergency, when you read the whole section, it has to be for extreme circumstances. It's in the case of war, an imminent war with Trinidad and another state, in the case of natural disasters, pestilence, diseases, and in the line that we use in relation to crime, it has to be a situation that has like immediate danger, right? I could read the exact phrasing here, right? Those have to be extreme and unusual circumstances, is my point. Is our crime situation, it's extreme, but is it something unusual, like a hurricane? Is it one-off? That's what I'm trying to say. The pandemic was something very unusual and one-off. When have you seen a pandemic? When will you see a pandemic in your lifetime? Crime should be dealt with under our usual policing powers, is what some people can't argue. We shouldn't have to resort to something like a state of emergency.
Because it's short term.
And it's short term. It's to deal with something extreme and unusual.
I think one of the things is an example that doesn't need a state of emergency, but I think there was a case where somebody had a pregnant wife and they couldn't make it to the hospital, so they tried to go on the bus routes, and the police basically said, "Nah, this is illegal, go back on the highway." And he's like, "Well, she's in labor and there's traffic all the way to Mount Hope, and you expect me to go back into the highway." So that's an example of, okay, you don't have a right to go on the bus route and you're barred from something that's practically necessary to you. Now take a state of emergency where your actual everyday, day-to-day rights might be stripped from you. You could have something going on at night that you need to leave, but it's a state of emergency, so you can't leave, right? And yes, if the police officers are allowed to show discretion, you might be able to reason with one, but say if you need to go across the country for some reason. You know, now you have to reason with every police officer you're going to meet on the way down and hope to God that, you know, you only need one of them to basically be, no, the letter of the law says this, and we're locking you up because you clearly disobeyed the
Let me
rules.
digress for a moment, and with not this entire focus on the state of emergency. But, Janelle, do you feel safe or do you live in anxiety? I live in anxiety every day in everything I do. From the time I leave my house in the morning, you know, do you feel safe?
I don't feel safe in certain circumstances. You want to hear something? When I was coming in here this morning, there was a man standing near the building just reading a newspaper. But we live in such a society, you can't trust anyone. I'm like, I look at his age, I look at his stance, he's reading a newspaper, and I still opted to walk in the road. Because I said, next when I walk past this man, and he's just using this newspaper as a decoy, and he locked my neck. So yes, I live in a state of anxiety and heightened awareness, something I would not, I would have probably passed him if I was still living in the UK.
Do you think a crime plan exists, or if a crime plan is working?
I trust our police commissioner when they say they have a crime plan.
That doesn't answer my question.
If it's working, well, the proof is in the pudding. And as I said, a crime plan has, I would assume, many limbs to it. One limb would be detection, one limb would be prevention, and so forth. And our detection rate, if we look at our murder rate, is abysmal. So I would have to then say some parts of the crime plan are not working, especially given the number of murders. I feel like this year will top last year.
Do you think, and my final question is, do you think, and it's not an interview, but it's to get an understanding. Do you think that in terms of efforts from a government level, like the Minister of National Security suggesting that his position is policy direction and ensuring that all the services have the necessary resources, do you think that is being done? Policy direction and ensuring all resources are there.
I believe there is some policy direction, and again, given what I read in the news, I cannot say every aspect of the national security is properly resourced. If we look at the mere fact that there weren't fire tenders at the fire station, it would be remiss of me to say, yes, everyone is properly resourced.
Because, you see, the thing is for me, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, I think I recall the Honorable Prime Minister suggesting that if a government cannot deal with a crime problem, then they themselves are part of the problem. And I think those were the words of the Prime Minister. Right? Probably not exactly the same words, but if a government cannot deal with crime, then they themselves are a part of the problem.
It goes to show that you have to be careful what you say because, you know, the situation could flip back on you, and then you have to be willing to face the same fire you throw out. But my final question would be just this. I understand that state of emergency is short term. So just on a basic level, it will cover up and suppress crime. But it's not necessarily a tool that has clear-cut ways that's going to eliminate aspects of crime and get criminals arrested and convicted.
It can get criminals arrested because it also extended powers of holding up and these things, but the convicted.
Right, we did have a situation where people who were arrested in the last crime state of emergency
were released.
But is there anything with regards to state of emergency that could be utilized or can imply the potential to help reduce crime that would have long-term implications, or actual reduction, as opposed to just suppression, and once it's over, it comes back up, it flares back up again?
Well, if you use the state of emergency and your searching powers to go and search house to house and seize all the arms that exist, arms and ammunition, that could have a long-term effect because a lot of our murders are undertaken using a gun. So if we take all the guns off the street, it might take, I don't know how fast criminals get guns coming into the country, but it might take a while, and that can help.
And that's the thing, that's a good point. It could help. But if you don't stop the source of the problem, which is the guns getting into the country,
yeah, long term it's not going to.
And that's what I said. The state of emergency, I also liken it to fireworks. Giving the people fireworks. People want to see something loud and big and immediate, and they're awed in the moment, and then it quickly blows away in smoke.
You mean like fireworks legislation?
Ketan, let us focus today, please. State of emergency.
Janelle, listen, it's good seeing you again. Yes, it felt like a long time.
Yes.
And it's wonderful having you on the program, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Yes, I look forward to seeing you and our audience.